Hey there, Broby223 here, and thanks for tuning in. I'm grateful to get to share another adventure from inside this intoxicating place where the foothills of the eastern slopes intersect with the park and grasslands of our home here in Alberta, Canada. Part of the sense of continual adventure we feel comes from knowing that we're in the middle of bear country. And not only are we reminded of this as we travel from our cities into the surrounding landscapes, but also in a much more visceral way as we live and play upon arrival. During the summer months, within the understory of our forested paradise grows an insane amount of wild berries, including raspberries, buffalo berries, aptly named bearberries, and even the odd clump of strawberries. So as my family and I work to maintain several miles of barbed wire fencing, as well as a wide-ranging network of walking and running trails, I sometimes find my mind wandering to wonder what else might be living in the woods today. Despite all our bear encounters thus far having been peaceful, it's not lost on me that there is some possibility that someday we might just find ourselves at the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's in this context I've been curious about this gun, a 44 mag chambered color case hardened Chiappa made model 1892 mare's leg, set up with a full length carbine stock and an Aimpoint C2 Acro. I'd been interested in the 44 mag for a while now, so my attraction to my strange new rifle seemed like the perfect entry point for some discovery sessions I'm now excited to share. My hope was to learn the degree to which the 44 mag's velocity is dependent on barrel length, and what are the effects of velocity on terminal performance across the variety of bullets you see here. Using a Garmin Xero C1 Pro and firing minimum 5-round strings of each ammo type, I sampled a barrel length spectrum between 7 1/4 and 20 inches, measured to the back of the cartridge in the breech. You can hit pause if you'd like to study the results a little longer, but the general takeaway is that there's about a 350 foot per second difference between the 13-inch spread of barrel length I investigated. Also, I've read in other folks' work that the cylinder gap of revolvers comes with about a 5 to 7% penalty in overall velocity. So if I apply a 6% correction factor for the two revolvers I used, this gap tightens up to around 250 feet per second, or 20 feet per second per inch of barrel length. The next thing I set out to investigate was drag and downrange velocity, so I made the risky move to set the chronograph up just in front of the berm and started backing up. Luckily, with no chronograph casualties to report, I fired a minimum of 4 rounds of each ammo type at 5 meters, 25 meters, 50 meters, 75 meters, 100 meters, 125 meters, and finally at 150 meters. Here's those results, which I promise we'll look at individually in more detail in just a sec. But what is up with that negative range shaded in blue area? I'd used a 16-inch barreled gun for this exercise, also though wanting to find a way to show what the curve could look like with the higher muzzle velocity from a longer barrel. You do this by sliding the x-axis backwards into that blue shaded area. Or alternatively, you could contemplate the lower muzzle velocity of a shorter barrel by sliding the x-axis the other way. With all that work out of the way, it was now time for some terminal ballistic testing using economical swamp water as test media, shooting each round from a distance of 150 meters, 100 meters, 50 meters, and 5 meters. I recovered 2 of each slug fired from each distance, and now have enough information to match up the recovered slugs with their downrange impact velocity, starting with these Barnes 225 grain solid copper expanding pistol bullets. Holding true to their advertising hype, across the entire velocity spectrum we investigated, they exhibited phenomenal near 100% weight retention, as well as great expansion even at the low end of their impact velocity range. Now stack that up against the only other solid copper bullet we were able to find, Hornady's 200 grain Monoflex. It's the lightest bullet we looked at, so I guess there should be a little surprise to learn it bleeds velocity faster than anything else in this year's test roster. How about weight retention? Not dissimilar to the Barnes bullet at essentially 100%. Expansion? Also excellent across the whole range of impact velocities, so the only drawbacks I can see are the 25 grains of mass we give up relative to the Barnes XPB, and contrasting this against the surprisingly low muzzle velocity of Hornady's factory offering. Very interesting then is Hornady's heavily hyped jacketed lead core Spitzer tipped FTX, which clocked in to share with a couple of other loads the fastest muzzle velocity of everything we tested. Despite his gummy tipped enhanced Spitzer style profile, it shed velocity at a rate that surprised me. Seemingly, there's no advantage to all this fancy geometry, and in fact, I think you sure pay for it in the department of close range terminal ballistics, where at 5 meters and 50 meters, these bullets, well, they simply came apart in a way that makes it difficult for me to imagine being comfortable pairing them with a rifle. How about one more from Hornady? This time, their 240 grain Extreme Terminal Performance factory offering. It had blazing top-tier muzzle velocity from my 16-inch barreled test gun, and in the friction department, it surprised me to do quite a bit better than their 225 grain Spitzer-styled FTX that we just looked at. But at the close ranges I'm interested in from a bear defense perspective, this corresponding high impact velocity taxes Hornady's bullet design beyond its limits, evident by the jacket core separation you see here. At 50, 100, and 150 meters though, this looks like pretty decent expansion and pretty decent weight retention. Now here's the last jacketed hollow point style bullet we looked at, a 240 grain offering from Federal in their American Eagle product line. Relative to all the other 240 grain loads we looked at, it tested out at the bottom end of the muzzle velocity department, proving still too fast though for close range bullet integrity. I'm imagining that if we ever had to use a gun to solve a bear problem, it's probably going to be at close range. So for me, this type of disintegration disqualifies a bullet from my loadout, and it appears that almost all the jacketed hollow points out there, when shot from a rifle, suffer from the same drawback. So into the realm of the jacketed soft point we went, starting with plain old 240 grain Winchester white box. It starts out with top tier muzzle velocity, and in the downrange department, you can see a trend starting to emerge describing the general shape of the 44 mag bullets we've been looking at. Across our entire range of impact velocity, it had almost unbelievable weight retention, just shy of 100%, but expansion, that only happened down to about 1400 feet per second. The next jacketed soft point we investigated was Remington's 240 grain high terminal performance load, showing a velocity curve that's right in line with most of the other 240 grain offerings. These bullets also had amazing 99% weight retention across the board, along with relatively more consistent and bigger expansion. But again, this petered out somewhere between 1300 to 1400 feet per second, below which there's only mild deformation of the bullet's exposed lead core. Time to try some bonded bullets, starting with Federal's 240 grain Fusion. It's made by electroplating a thick jacket around a lead core, then swaged to form an exposed lead nose that has a very slight concave curvature. No surprises on its downrange velocity curve, weight retention essentially perfect at 98%, but check out this crazy expansion at close range, raising a question around pursuit of a bigger hole perhaps costing too much in the penetration department. Hence, I don't think I'd use this round in a bear rifle with a 16 or 20 inch barrel, but it might be just right through my 12 inch barreled Chiappa. So all this brings us to a bonded bullet Federal designed specifically with rifles in mind, their 270 grain bonded flat nose Fusion. Because of its heavier mass, it has noticeably slower muzzle velocity, which you can see it then holds quite a bit better than all the other offerings we've looked at thus far. Weight retention was again nearly 100%, but this time we only experienced that classic expansion profile everyone seems to be looking for at close range, beyond which I'd say expansion was moderate to slight. Worth noting is that this bullet penetrated further than all the rest, requiring several additional swamp water tubs to catch. Lastly, lots of folk with experience around hunting dangerous animals talk about selecting their bullets based on straight line, deep penetration. In this context, it was a surprise for me to discover a contender in the electroplated Campro bullets that I handload for affordable practice. I fired about a dozen of them at close range into these swamp water tubs and was amazed to discover that they stay intact to tunnel straight through about 96 inches of water before they pile up on the polyethylene back wall of that last tub. Their 8 thou thick encapsulating copper jacket, it remained intact with only slight expansion that I'd characterize as a mild bulge. So if deep straight line penetration is more important to you than expansion, this could be an interesting bullet to explore more in the future. And with this for basic discovery now under my belt, I set out for some practice, both with my camera equipment for that classic first-person-ish Broby perspective, and with my rifle to learn what I can reliably and properly hit while managing both at the same time. And all this practice, it sure had a goal in mind, a DIY spring bear hunt as an opportunity to marry all this conceptual discovery with actual first-hand bear experience. And to share it with you, I want to take a bit of a risk and try to do it with no narration, letting the story unfold through the lens of my camera alone. If this appeals to you, please find a way to let me know. Thanks for listening this far, and I hope you enjoy my 44 mag spring bear hunt.